All right, hello everyone, and thank you to you from West Virginia. It's been a couple days since we've been talking about the Zodiac Killer, with the exception of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders uploads that we started doing on this channel. But it's been a while since we've had just a pure Zodiac Killer upload. I'm glad to talk about some other subjects, but I have to confess this is a case of fascination as well. Today we're going to be discussing some of the theories associated with Darlene Ferrin, because I've mentioned multiple times on this channel throughout these uploads that Darlene Ferrin is the epicenter of Zodiac conspiracy theories, and I'm not the first person to say that. This was something that I noticed even back when I first really began going over Zodiac info back in 2011, about 8 years ago. I began to notice that from the get go, instantaneously, people were talking more about Darlene Ferrin than they were about the other Zodiac victims. And today we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about why that is the case. If we're just going to throw out some Darlene Ferrin conspiracy theories, the first one I'd like to talk about was actually something that somebody left as a comment on one of my uploads here on this channel. And they were saying that the Zodiac Killer was a 50-year-old merchant marine, and this person was having an affair with Darlene Ferrin. So Darlene Ferrin is having an affair with this merchant marine, right? And then jealous lover, mentally unstable. You get the idea. That leads him to the Zodiac killings, and that could also possibly be tied into something that we mentioned with the concept of committing a series of murders to try and disguise this around just really trying to murder Darlene Ferrin. Before you think that that's just some kind of silly, far out theory, that is actually in line with something called the Tarbox Confession. And I thought about doing an entire upload on the Tarbox Confession here on this channel. What that is that there was this lawyer named Robert Tarbox. Ever since I first read about him, always remembered the name. It's a very unusual name, Tarbox. Also, there was this guy who used to have I used to listen to his uploads on YouTube. It was called Teletorture, and he had a fictional lawyer character named Wilson Tarbuckles. I always wanted to know if that was somehow connected. I interviewed him once back when I was a writer for an entertainment website. I forgot to ask the question. I've always regretted it. But the point is, Tarbox, an unusual name, right? So, he received a confession from somebody who walked into his office who was a merchant marine. Didn't really leave too much information. And this guy confessed to being the Zodiac Killer. He knows he's a merchant marine. And that's all Tarbox really saw from him. Never saw him again. Robert Tarbox, the Tarbox Confession. I thought about doing kind of a larger upload on this, but it all just ties back into something associated with the Darlene Ferrin conspiracy theories, so we can discuss that a little bit more. I have to confess, when someone left that comment on my upload that Darlene Ferrin's having an affair with a 50-year-old merchant marine, I was just like, well, that just sounds kind of far out. That sounds a little bit implausible. It's almost as if it's too extreme to be true. Not to mention some of the things that we said about Lyndon Lafferty and his suspect, George Russell Tucker, that it's just kind of existing in its own microcosm. It only works within one person's narrative. But that's not true when it comes to this merchant marine theory. It actually does have kind of an outside supporting thing. Like someone wrote a giant spiel on my upload about this. They have their own reasons why they believe that this merchant marine, whoever he is the Zodiac Killer. And it's actually supported by the Tarbox Confession, something that, I have heard of and is kind of well known in Zodiac lore. So that's a big Darlene Ferrin conspiracy theory. But some of the other things that we can talk about today is that the theories around Darlene Ferrin are very well connected to a wide variety of Zodiac suspects. One of the reasons why I thought for the longest time that Louis Myers was the Zodiac Killer was because he had just such a sort of faultless narrative. I repeat, faultless. And he had connections to the first two victims, Faraday and Jensen. He was working in a restaurant with Darlene Ferrin. It's just like he was a busboy, she was a waitress, Terry's Restaurant, San Francisco, I believe in that exact location. But the fact of the matter is, I've taken Louis Myers off the list of potential suspects, and he's in the elimination category. Why? Because there just wasn't a good explanation about the ciphers. There wasn't enough revelation. They only sort of presented material to the general public in the Louis Myers theory about how there are only things that the public could have known. They didn't present any genuine thing with a definitive certainty that Louis Myers was the Zodiac Killer. They didn't just be like, okay, well, this is what the ciphers are really saying. Here's how it's done. They didn't say, oh, well, here's Paul Stein's wallet, and here's a scrap of Paul Stein's bloody shirt from the taxicab murder. Or, this is the pistol that was used in the murders. I mean, like, same caliber, same make, you can check this and that. None of that happened. So I kind of put Louis Myers in the elimination category. Now, you want to talk about conspiracy theories, though. I'd say one of the sort of largest theories that I came up with, going over this information, I put two uploads on this channel talking about the possibility of Richard Gaikowski being the Zodiac Killer, but only for the murder of Darlene Ferrin. That Richard Gaikowski, perhaps the biggest prime suspect after Arthur Lee Allen, committed the murder of Darlene Ferrin and tried to pass it off as a Zodiac killing. In short, disguising the murder of Darlene as something that was done by the Zodiac, when in reality it could have been done by Richard Gaikowski. The only reason I say that is because Richard Gaikowski was working in Albany, New York, the same time Darlene Ferrin was in Albany, New York. He was working in a building that Darlene's husband was also working in. And I just thought, that is too big of a coincidence to ignore. And I still stand by that there should be something, that something is horribly array with that. It sort of sounds like Gaikowski had this infatuation with Darlene Ferrin, and he was following her around the country. And we have other things going on. Lawrence Kane harassing her in a restaurant. Arthur Lee Allen living very close by. And, I believe George Russell Tucker was a frequent guest at this Terry's restaurant in the San Francisco Bay Area. That was another thing. So many people are just kind of in the vicinity of Darlene Ferrin. Now, I did have something prepared for today to talk about the kind of motivations about why Darlene Ferrin is the kind of epicenter of all these Zodiac conspiracy theories. Why does everybody always come back to her? And I've also mentioned that I'm a big fan of the channel Brain Scratch with John Lorton. And even in his Zodiac Killer upload that he did, he said very clearly kind of what everybody was already thinking, where it's just like everyone comes back to Darlene. The Zodiac Killer must have had an enormous infatuation with Darlene Ferrin, because it seems to show in the way that people trace these Zodiac theories, much more so than Betty Lou Jensen or Cecilia Ann Shepard. And I did have something prepared today that I wanted to talk about with the other female victims, but I made a mistake. I mean, Betty Lou Jensen was a teenager. Cecilia Ann Shepard and Darlene Ferrin were the same age. I made the mistake of thinking that Cecilia Ann Shepard was much younger than 22 years old. Both Cecilia Ann Shepard and Darlene Ferrin, if I recall correctly, they were both 22 years old when they were murdered. I thought Cecilia Ann Shepard was much younger, and I would have said that Darlene Ferrin was kind of the only one who was at the suitable age to become the epicenter of these conspiracy theories, because if someone's a teenager, 16, 17 years old, people would be less likely to believe that they're having an affair with a 50-year-old merchant marine. That's not impossible. Crazier things have happened on the planet Earth. The Zodiac Killer mystery itself is crazier than that. But people would be less receptive to that. People would be less likely to be thinking about that. And it was almost just like I thought Darlene Ferrin was the most mature woman, and people were just zoning in on her because of that. But that's not really the case. Cecilia Ann Shepard also has a lot of. She had this. She was at the same age that Darlene Ferrin was, both born in 1947. Well, Cecilia Ann Shepard was born in 47, died in 69, and Darlene Ferrin must have been born in 46 and passed away in 68. Now, one of the things, though, that we do need to note with some of this stuff is, because there's a whole lot of things to say going on, and this is going to tie into some other big issues. I would love to know more. Maybe in a future upload I can discuss some things. What would exactly be the Arthur Lee Allen connection to Darlene Ferrin? We know that he lived in the vicinity of there. It was either 50 feet or 50 meters from Darlene Ferrin's restaurant. But does he have like a motivation the way that Lawrence Kane did? Or Richard Gaikowski or George Russell Tucker or Louis Myers? I mean, like, those people all have a very definitive connection. Even the George Russell Tucker thing, where it's just he's a frequent guest at a restaurant, he becomes infatuated with this kind of server, and she's a server waitress, and he develops some sort of admiration for her. But also, George Russell Tucker is a rage-filled individual who is trying to restore his ego after his wife had the affair on him, and he resorted to rage and violence. With all the suspects we've mentioned, Arthur Lee Allen and George Russell Tucker, Lawrence Kane, Louis Myers, we mentioned the profiler, Sharon Hagen, who appears in that sort of interview documentary thing. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, making a very bold statement that the Zodiac Killer was not sadistic, the Zodiac Killer was not sort of rage-filled. She's even going as far as saying that Arthur Lee Allen's profile did not match that. Well, if you're going to talk about someone who is not rage-filled and has, the impulse control and the mental instability, well then Lawrence Kane would have to be eliminated. Because that's the whole reason why he's on the Zodiac list. Yes, of course, I mean, Harvey Hopkins claims that he was able to crack the cipher and that it reveals Lawrence Kane. Yes, of course, but a lot of people say that they found names in the ciphers. But the whole thing is, Lawrence Kane is someone who had a head injury, he had mental instability, impulse control. They're saying that's not the case, that the Zodiac was not like that. But when I was reading the description of how Cecilia Ann Shepard was murdered, the final female victim, she was stabbed 5 times in the front and stabbed 5 times in the back. I don't know, is that sadistic? Does that sound like sadism? It really depends on what you mean by sadistic. I mean, okay, yeah, some people are stabbed 70 times, 80 times, 90 times. They're just absolutely ravaged. And one of the reasons why this individual, Sharon Hagen, who someone in the comments section challenged saying she's not very credible, one of the reasons why people challenge this stuff is she cites Sherry Jo Bates as sort of a comparison, saying that the Sherry Jo Bates murder was vicious. Sherry Jo Bates was slashed across the face. She was very, very savagely stabbed. But if I recall, Cecilia Ann Shepard was tied up, incapacitated. She wasn't able to defend herself, whereas Sherry Jo Bates was. There was an enormous struggle in the Bates murder. She ripped off the killer's watch. She was able to pull out pieces of his hair. When it comes to Cecilia Ann Shepard, I believe she was, completely tied at that point. She was like she was able to defend herself. Stabbed 5 times in the front, 5 times in the back. I don't know, even stabbing somebody 10 times. To me, someone whom I hope you can trust, I am not a homicidal maniac that you know of, that sounds pretty sadistic. And I'll also mention you're saying the Zodiac Killer is not a sadist, murdering 5 people, claiming to murder 37 people, writing letters and playing mind games with the police. That sounds a little bit sadistic. But one thing I can kind of agree is the Zodiac doesn't always seem like someone who is this kind of rage filled individual with impulse control, like the way they are describing Lawrence Kane. Because Lawrence Kane, supposedly, when we're going back to the Darlene Ferrin conspiracies now, he was a frequent guest at Terry's restaurant, harassing Darlene Ferrin. But at the same time, if we're going to use that profiling description, that doesn't exactly sound like what we're looking for. So this individual is Sharon Hagen, psychological profiling, not an exact state-of-the-art science. I have some mixed feelings on it, but if we're going to listen to that and kind of try to find the diamonds in the rough, if you will, it sort of sounds like Lawrence Kane might be someone that we can kind of push over toward our elimination list. He's not quite there yet. We're not done with him, because there are a lot of things about Lawrence Kane that seem very much in line with the Zodiac Killer. Okay, so we mentioned we're going to try and learn more about Arthur Lee Allen's connections to Darlene, as well as Cecilia Ann Shepard, Betty Lou Jensen. We're also going to be trying to learn more about Ross Sullivan's connections to these individuals. Anybody target at random? I mean, is this like just like random people who are at lovers' lanes and of course Paul Stein the taxi driver? Or is there something a little more systematic? Because what it sounds like is that people are zoning in on Darlene Ferrin to really try and say the Zodiac had a connection to her. But, what would be going on with that? Well, is it just because he was a frequent guest in her restaurant and he developed some sort of feelings for her? Or is it something much greater than that? Was somebody having an affair with Darlene? Which isn't impossible. It's kind of, something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But is it possible that the Zodiac was involved with her? Is it possible that Richard Gaikowski was involved with Darlene Ferrin? In theory, yes. And we always have that very famous photo of Darlene Ferrin with an unknown man. She is standing next to him. He's wearing dark rimmed glasses, and he has long bushy hair. Not really the short, the very short crew cut. Kind of long, bushy, brown hair. They put it out on America's Most Wanted, and people don't really know who the man in the photo is. When I first saw that photo, and you can find this on Google, maybe Google Darlene Ferrin next to unknown man, I was like, there's no way that's the Zodiac Killer. America's Most Wanted was trying to find out more information about this. Could this person potentially be the Zodiac? But some people theorize that it could be a young Gaikowski, it could be Louis Myers, and maybe it could be someone else like Crabtree, who we haven't talked about much. But one of the things that we just want to kind of examine with these Darlene Ferrin conspiracy theories is Darlene Ferrin just sort of becoming the kind of epicenter of all this conspiracy stuff because, she was a server in a restaurant. How easy is it to say that, oh yes, so-and-so frequented that restaurant? These theories about how they're connected to Darlene are mostly, and I repeat mostly, paper thin. Lawrence Kane was harassing her at a restaurant. Well, Darlene was a server in a restaurant. Maybe Lawrence Kane was actually there. Maybe it wasn't him. It's so easy to fabricate a narrative. Yeah, somebody went to the restaurant and they were mean to her. You don't really need any hard evidence to back that up. It's very, very easy to compose a narrative associated with Darlene Ferrin. Except something like the Richard Gaikowski thing. I almost have doubts about that entire thing about Richard Gaikowski being in Albany and Darlene Ferrin being in Albany at the same time. Gaikowski working in the same building as Darlene Ferrin's husband. It's been cited in multiple places. But it's just, if that were genuinely true, I mean, the spotlight should be right there. That's something that's a little bit more difficult to fabricate. But yeah, it's just like, even if you look at the Arthur Lee Allen, Darlene Ferrin connection, where you're sort of just saying that Arthur Lee Allen lived nearby. Lots of people live nearby Darlene Ferrin's restaurant. It doesn't mean that they were a murderer. The Louis Myers thing was something that really kind of took things to a different level. And when Randy Kenny went public with the Louis Myers theory, I was really pulled in because that's not just saying something like, oh, he was a frequent guest in the restaurant. Oh, he came by the restaurant and he yelled at her. Oh, he lived 50 meters away from the restaurant. See how easy it is to compose things associated with this? They're saying Louis Myers was a busboy in the restaurant. He worked with Darlene. He was a classmate of Betty Lou Jensen. He had a direct physical connection to her beyond anything other than maybe he went there once and he yelled at her or something like that. And we don't even know who that was. No, he worked there. But the fact of the matter is, with the Louis Myers theory, there just wasn't enough definitive evidence revealed that could completely connect Myers to the murders. And if we're going to entertain that, like I said, the diamonds in the rough from the psychological profiling associated with Lawrence Kane, it sounds like he's getting closer to the elimination column. Maybe Arthur Lee Allen, always on the back burner. There's a little bit more physical things that would be connecting Arthur Lee Allen. And one of the things we didn't get to talk about last time in the His Name Was Arthur Lee Allen kind of review that we did, mentioning pipe bombs in the Zodiac letters, and then it turns out Arthur Lee Allen has the exact kind of pipe bomb found in his basement. Very big things in a circumstantial sense that seem to connect Arthur Lee Allen to the Zodiac murders. But we always have DNA, fingerprints, side palm print, and so supposedly a psychological profile that doesn't match. A lot of forensic things pushing us away. Arthur Lee Allen's always on the back burner. But if anything, we're slowly trying to eliminate Lawrence Kane, Louis Myers, George Russell Tucker. And, there are many, many suspects. But I was out at the bus stop the other day, and I was waiting for my bus to come. And I just began to think about Lyndon Lafferty and the George Russell Tucker theory. I was like, it's so plausible. The whole thing about someone who finds out his wife is having an affair with a judge, and then he kind of loses control and he has a mental breakdown. So then he resorts to becoming the Zodiac Killer as a way to restore his ego, targeting lovers' lanes, targeting that girl that he sees bringing him breakfast every morning, and then moving on to commit the murder of Paul Stein, and has this connection to a high-ranking judge, so that's why he was never caught. I was like, oh, that sounds so plausible. But then I remembered the very things that I said at the beginning, the things that I've stood by with the Lyndon Lafferty theory and the suspect George Russell Tucker. It only works in its own microcosm. It only works in its own little bubble. It's not really gaining any sort of traction outside of Lyndon Lafferty's narrative. And so much of it is that Lafferty saw a guy at a rest stop and he was like, well, that guy's really creeping me out. I think maybe I should look into him. That's not the best thing that I've ever heard. So, I kind of have George Russell Tucker, in the Zodiac elimination category for now. And maybe we're going to look into a few more of the suspects that they mentioned that other people have asked me to look into. But if anything, from this upload, you can come away learning that Darlene Ferrin might be the epicenter of these conspiracy theories because it's very easy to compose them with someone who is they can very easily to compose a theory about someone working in a restaurant. Okay, he was a frequent guest. Okay, he lived nearby. Okay, he was a busboy there, so he must have been the murderer. And those things are easy to compose, and then people come back to Darlene Ferrin in the end. Well, that's all for me now. Let's discuss more in the comments section. Thank you for listening, and until next